seeing yourself as someone who delivers content, they don't need the content. Knowledge is at our fingertips. We have way too much knowledge at our fingertips. And what we need is to get students more curious. There are so many strategies about getting students to actively engage in questions, but the number one thing that has to happen is you have to take grades and just stop. And I get so much flack every time I say de-emphasize grades, because people will say, well, parents will want them. Well, sure, but not forever, just in the beginning, but give them some other kind of feedback.
Hello and welcome to the Future is Clear Teach Like It's 2045 webcast series. My name is Scott Carr and I'm from CESA 2. Today's topic is embracing work-based learning and the key components to your classroom. And with me, joining me is Dr. Sandra Adams. Thanks for joining us today, Sandra.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm very excited for the talk.
Yeah, so am I. Dr. Adams currently serves as the ACTE Vice President for the Administration Division and an Area CTE Director in Indiana. She is a passionate advocate for all things CTE, which has led to to her authoring 4 books specific to CTE leadership and instruction. Most recently, Sandra has joined the Catapult team, which I'm very excited to talk about, as a speaker on high quality CTE instruction. So welcome again. Appreciate you taking the time. And I'm really excited the fact that we can spend some time to talk about CTE. I met Sandra through a common friend of ours, Sylvester Chisholm. And I have to say, she was on the Global CTE podcast. How long ago was that, Sandra?
A year and a half ago.
Okay.
Time flies.
Yeah. I was just telling Sandra before here that I probably watched her podcast with Sylvester at least 5 times. I've stole a lot of great stuff from it, and I got to put a plug in. I was also on Sylvester's podcast, and it came out today. So yeah, kind of excited. So how's the year going for you so far?
Fast and furious, but excellent.
Yeah. What school is it that you work for? I know you're a CTE administrator, but what school in Indiana?
So I currently play a double role as principal of a career center in Fort Wayne. It's the Career Academy, part of Fort Wayne Community Schools. We are home to 16 different sending schools and homeschool students across Allen County in Indiana. And then I'm also the director for the area career and tech ed. So I do all things from Perkins funding, grant writing, down to daily discipline. So, but fortunately we have very little of that. So
yeah,
very good.
Wow. Yeah. You've got a lot on your plate. I know for sure. But so tell me a little bit about your journey, your backstory. Where do you come from? Obviously it sounds like there's a lot. You've done a lot. Tell us a little bit about, where you're coming from.
Yeah. So it's really funny because I was once, I think if I gave myself a title, I would say an academic elitist. I really believed in the 4-year push to college that we've all been, ingrained to think. And I taught advanced placement courses at a small rural high school. So it's very funny because now I'm CTE in a large urban district, and it has been a great learning journey for me. I was teaching psychology and really became more interested in thinking and learning. And I started my own company to deliver professional learning services. And one of the very first people that reached out to hire me happened to be a CTE director. And it was the very CTE director that I now have replaced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was the first time that I had really exposed myself to everything that career and tech had to offer. And if I'm being really honest and open, it took me about 2.5 years to understand everything that was happening at that school and within all of the different program areas. And so I think the best compliment I have ever received was that former director said I was a learner on steroids. And I took that as an incredible compliment at the time. But truthfully, I have just learned so much that I was an instructional coach at the school, and then I became an assistant principal, and now the principal and director. And I saw firsthand that when I was an AP psych teacher, I would have maybe one or two students every year go off to college and major in psychology, and it was great. But at the Career Center, I got to be this is about 9 years ago, we piloted high school interns. And I know now that term is ubiquitous and not shocking that there are high school interns, but I remember the whole experience like it was yesterday when we first launched into that. And we did it with 9 software students,
Wow.
and watching the trajectory of those 9 students was all I needed to see, and I have never looked back.
Wow. Wow. How exciting.
Yeah.
So why do let me ask you this, your journey and what you've all done, and now again, as a part of Catapult and being able to spread your knowledge as a great thought leader and innovator in our work. Why why the need for change? Why do we need to have that focus on a career, maybe even community readiness type of approach in our educational systems?
So, in my opinion, and I won't try to go too much into this because I could talk about this all day. This was my dissertation area, is I'm really passionate about the concepts of Moore's Law. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I'm not.
Okay,
Tell me.
so I love Thomas Friedman's work and Mark Perner's work on the future of work. But one of the most important concepts that people need to understand is Moore's Law. I think his first name might have been Robert, but Robert Moore was an Intel intellect who was part of developing microprocessor chips.
Hmm.
And he came up with this theory decades ago that the pace of technology is going to double every 2 years. And so, really, what we know now is he was wrong, but he was only wrong that it's even faster. It's
Oh,
18
wow.
months. And so, if you ever want to be like really deeply immersed in the world of microchips, I know enough to be dangerous, but the processing power, the storage power, the computational power all double every 18 months, which means we go from the jobs we know today to who knows what they're going to be. And so one of the reasons I ran for the ACTE board position is I just want to be a part of, we changed secondary education to match the age we live in.
Yeah,
And
well
that's
said.
that's
Yeah.
something that just drives me personally.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. I know some of the information that you find out there, right? I mean, our second graders, third graders, 65% of the careers don't even exist for
Yeah.
them right now, right? So, I mean, it really makes you think, what is it that we should be doing in our classrooms? What's our focus, right?
So my kind of like rude awakening, oh wow, I'm really behind, was that first year we had the interns. I stopped at one of the software companies to check on the interns. And when I went in, the secretary, now remember, this is 9 years ago. So the secretary said, oh, you should go in right now. They're in a cloud architect meeting. And I remember thinking, didn't even know we had cloud architects, but that doesn't surprise me. And I went into the meeting and I
Right.
remember them talking about like containerization and other terms that I left the meeting and Googled. And but now cloud architect is a common job. And 9 years ago, that was brand new. And now we need to have people who are architects for AI questions. And just getting students to think outside of a nurse and a teacher. No offense to educators, I am one, but you know what
Right.
I mean. Like
Yeah.
really think about careers and what your potential is.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Tell us a little bit about your books. And really, why I know you've moved with some of your books then to like CTE. I think you have one that's right, PLCs and CTE.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about your books. I'm curious.
So, so I will say, my 4 books really are kind of curtailing the journey of my professional career, because our first book is It's my personal favorite. It's the least seller, but it's my personal favorite. It's called Dive into Strategic Thinking because at the time, I was kind of given a literacy expert title in, do you remember back in the Race to the Top days?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was an
Yeah.
Ohio coach, right? And everywhere I went, people kept saying, well, I wish there was a guide to depth of knowledge 3 and 4 that would make it a little easier. And I would always joke and say, well, that's why it's not easy, is because it's complex thinking. So to create the environments for complex thinking is not going to be easy. And so I ended up writing a book to help people reach that higher level of thinking. But then when I became an instructional coach, or excuse me, before I became an instructional coach, one of the reasons I wanted that job was because I had been working for the director who I said was the first to hire me. And then I was traveling around the country to all kinds of career and tech centers. And I really just came to the understanding that no one, to my knowledge yet, had written an instructional book for welding, for automotive, for health sciences. And so we wrote But I'm Not a Reading Teacher, connected to the importance of literacy and to really just kind of dispel that literacy can be taught as your everyday checks for understanding can have a really high level of literacy if you just know the strategies that you're using. And so then we followed up with next level CTE instruction, which is sequencing a lot of the foundational strategies into this could be your whole system for teaching. And it's all about engaging. And then the last book, PLC and CTE, was my realization as a leader in the buildings that the biggest problem between the comprehensive school and PLCs in career and tech ed is that DeFore's work was really centered on commonality of assessments and being able to benchmark so you can compare data. But in CTE, there's so many singletons that that's really difficult to
Right.
do. And
Yeah.
I
Right.
noticed, yeah, and I noticed through the years that teachers love to talk about their content area, but didn't necessarily share my deep passion for just instruction, because I'm an instruction geek. I will tell you, I could talk about instructional strategies all day long. But so what I ended up doing was just shifting the focus and giving people examples around the science of learning from Hattie and 2 other models that I created based on my own work that really work to bring singletons together around instruction and not content. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've had a lot of good feedback on that book.
Oh, I bet you have. How long ago did you write that book?
3 years ago, I think.
3? Yeah.
Time goes too fast. I forget
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is interesting. It seems like there is a divide sometimes in our school systems of that career, right? Career readiness, like it's going to be taught in a class, like a career class versus, and then that, PLC, which is great work, right? I mean, at the root of PLC of collaboration and using data to drive better practices, but how do you mesh those two together, right? How do you at a couple of the schools I'm working in, we've actually had conversation where can we talk about career readiness in our PLC time? And it's like, why wouldn't you, right? I mean, isn't
Yeah.
that we talking about everything that kind of this, it's all about the students, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you get any of that kind of conversation when, what's that sound like out there? How do you solve that problem, I guess?
Yeah, honestly, I have found that I'll give you a really good example. We had a cosmetology instructor share a instructional strategy that she was using to lead to some employability skills. And the whole focus was I had challenged people to think about adaptability and agility because I'm
Mhm.
also a huge fan of the Global Achievement Gap book and his ideas around we're not preparing kids enough for those 2
Right.
factors. So she explained how she developed this strategy, and we called it the switch. And she she forced students to follow this criteria, and they were working on mannequin heads, and then she would say switch just randomly, like in 30 seconds and a minute and a half, and then they would have to step into someone else's work and try to finish it based on what their criteria was. And then at the end there was this debrief on, okay, so how did you have to be adaptable, and how hard was it to be adaptable? And then my graphic design teacher and an automotive teacher both took her strategy and formed it for their own programs,
Oh,
and
wow.
then came back to say what they were doing. And so that's one of the reasons I write the books, is to put my my money where my mouth is. I constantly preach the value of shared practices. We all know we
Yeah.
should say it, but I find so few people really do share their best practices. And to me, that's what we're in the game for. Like, if there's a great instructional strategy that you're doing, you should share it with everyone that teaches around you, and let everyone learn to be more engaging. And so that's what I find, is if you create those PLC communities and focus on instruction and employability skills that we all have in common, people really are encouraged to be more creative.
Yeah, yeah, well said. I agree. It seems like we put up our own boundaries sometimes for teachers, and that's unfortunate. I like Justin Reich in his book Iteration talks about, right, how he talks about the fact that the best work is done by the best teachers, but it tends to be done behind closed doors, and we don't even know what's happening. So it's really
So
cool.
true.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, it's really cool that I think it's great that I haven't read your book yet. I definitely
All right.
it's on my list. It's on my list. So I'm gonna be one of those you can brag about the number of books that you have out there, people reading, right? So that's a good thing, right? That influence.
Yeah,
That's one thing I really love about you, is that you want to influence and help others to get better at what they're doing, right? And isn't that what it's all about?
it is. It
So
really is. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I want to move a little bit into, so we talked a little there about, why we need this kind of a shift, but let's talk a little bit about what it is that we need to see. Like what should be happening, and you're in a school now, work-based learning. I know that's a part of it, and that's what we kind of want to talk about here, has really taken off. And I know it has in your state big time, but what are you seeing? What are some of the learning experiences that are being offered that have the greatest impact?
So with work-based learning, one of the areas that I have been trying to work on now is the process, not the outcome. And, I really believe that when you focus on the process, you end up getting the outcome that you would have aimed at. And I really have been trying to look at the ultimate experience in career and tech ed is somebody who comes in as a junior and then stays in that field. I knew what I was wanting to do. And then my year 2 experience, I can really develop my skills and my passion to launch into that field. And so I have taken a deep dive into, how do we start as juniors to do work-based learning experiences that build to my interviewing skills, my technical skills, so that I can land that internship. So one of the examples that I like to use is I encourage people to pilot. If you're afraid to jump in, I always say, well, let's pilot this. And so one of the pieces that I'm trying to pilot right now is when we have our advisory board meeting, to get partners to volunteer to teach students, this is how we do a email introduction. I believe wholeheartedly that networking is the least developed skill that we teach children. And so you and I both know, if we both wanted to be introduced to someone and you would reach out to me and say, Sandy, do you know Kevin Fleming? And I would say, oh, I sure do. And you'd say, could you
Yeah,
digitally introduce me? And I would do that for you. But we don't teach students that. We make them figure that
right.
out on their own sometimes. So developing that skill in students, and then teaching them, here is a mentor. You don't even have to know them face to face. You can set up a Zoom, and moving into interview assignments and collective interviews, which is one of my favorites. In the collective interview, is where you have students all looking at somebody in the industry with specific questions that you know will advance students. And then rather than boring the class to tears by having 18 people give a 20-minute presentation, you
Right.
put kids into groups of 5 and you say, find the commonalities, find the absurdities, and create a 6-minute presentation on how these interviews collectively represent this field. And so now you've staged students to work with partners, figure out what partners are saying and what that means, and then collaborating and communicating it out at an advanced level. And so I have all kinds of activities like that I've just been working on a progression that lead to leadership skills that flow with the technical skill development that we already do focus on.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. I was just in a class, in a school on Monday. They had a PD day, and I was working with a group of teachers around this, a piloted group. We had the exact same conversation. We kept kind of brainstorming around, well, how can you make it more that your classroom is a collab type lab, and it's a business. Like, how can you not be the teacher, but you're the CEO in here? And what are some of the expectations that you have of your students and communicating to you personally, right? That they could email you rather than ask questions. They got to go through an email or produce something that is a business related type of activity right there in the classroom. But some good stuff. One of the sections on your podcast with Sylvester I found really cool is that you talk about that, students obviously should have that workplace learning opportunity, right? And that some kids are ready, some kids are not, but every kid should have that opportunity, right? So how do you see how can you make that happen? Right? Otherwise, we've got that equity gap, right? Where kids that are not interested or don't have the means, don't have the opportunity. How are you doing that where you see or can make it where every kid has that opportunity?
So one of the things that I do in that world is to focus on staging it so that students can have that feeling of success. And, sometimes our partners are right in our backyard. I
Mm.
use middle schools and elementary schools to help foster the abilities in students so that they can go out. So for instance, within a school district, you have your own maintenance teams, you have
Yep.
your own purchasing teams, you have your own IT teams. And so I have had a lot of success in reaching out and saying, here's a student not quite ready to go out to a local partner,
That's a great idea.
need to develop them. And then I have to tell you, really, Scott, I'm never afraid to ask for help. And so I will call partners that are friends of mine and say, hey, I have a graphic design student. He doesn't even know how to shake hands well.
Yeah.
Could you mentor him? And it has been, I have found that people just really are willing to help these students. And then finding those consortiums, like we have a 30 under 30, we have, the leaders of Fort Wayne, we have the innovation
Mhm.
team,
Mhm.
different groups and having them come in and work with students. I have never had someone say that they wouldn't want to come in and pitch an idea to kids and have students work on that, and then they come back and the students all get a chance to speak to their idea. And down to those really hard conversations, we have had interviews and then pulled students aside and said, listen, this is going to be hard for you to hear, but you ranked
Yeah.
low in every one of the interviews today. Why do you think that is? And I remember one student that we had that difficult talk with had no idea that his passion wasn't coming through. And, to me, far better learn that when you're in high school
Right.
than when you really need a job.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I just feel like the more that you can put a student out there, and if it's not work-based learning ready, get a middle school class that they can go in and teach, or find a maintenance person and have an electrical student work alongside them in an elementary building. We have had so much success traveling that route that I would highly encourage it.
Yeah, that is a good idea, right? I mean, our school systems in a lot of our communities here, especially the rural ones, it's the biggest organization in town. It's the biggest business in town, right?
Yeah.
What are you seeing as in regards to the responses out of your students? You know, how do they embrace this? You know, give us a little conversation around that.
I will say one of the funniest things I've done is I took a IT class to teach. I thought they were saying fourth graders on the phone. They took them to first grade. It was first, not fourth. And some of my students looked at me like that when we walked in, and I said, "It's all good. We're just going to do the code.org lesson." And
Yeah.
so we did the hands-on code.org lesson. And before we went, I taught them like I would teach a class. And then I had them, and I remember these two of the students were really soft spoken. And I said, listen, you're never commanding a group of children with that voice. Like never, they're never going to listen to you. And so just having those opportunities, that was my favorite, because when
Wow.
we left, they were on cloud nine.
Yeah.
They loved it. I've never had kids that didn't want to go back. It is really just because, it's
Mm.
it's part of the problem with taking the middle school out is they don't get to be leaders. And so there's nothing middle school kids think is cooler than a high school student. And so putting them that teen to teen talk, I always say that we don't understand sometimes, they are so good at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. How about your community? I mean, what's the responses that you're getting from your community members?
Yeah. Well, I know that people on this call probably do this as well, but we now do a signing day at the end of the year that celebrates the intern success. And we do different recognitions throughout the year. And our community is rallied around the
Mhm.
expansion of career and tech ed. Last year, we had a standing room only signing day event. We signed 148 interns
Wow.
actually just went right into the workforce. And we have companies that call us continually to get students to work with them. So it is a great problem to have. Very
Yeah.
good problem to
Wow.
have.
Super cool. Super cool. So I want to talk a little bit about like connected learning in classrooms.
Mhm.
And I really love your take on the language components and how they impact and the impact that they can have, right? And how we want to have that connected in the classroom. I'm
Mhm.
wondering, talk a little bit about those four component areas. How, tell us a little bit about your concept behind it, I guess, to start, and we'll talk a little more.
So So the concept, I will not lie, I took the idea from a WIDA training. Not saying that I
Listen,
created
I
it.
stole it from you, so just
Okay,
just
it's all right. It's
totally
all right.
transparent.
And I went years ago when I had my own company. Somebody asked me if I would do the WIDA training and then go back and train their staff. And so I did that. And
Right.
day two of the WIDA, as everybody knows, is ELL training.
Yeah. Yep.
And I went to the director of the session on day two and said, I feel like I'm in an immersive special education training. And she said, that's really what it is, only it's based on language. And she was the one who really transformed my thoughts about literacy.
Mhm.
And it is that it's swirl. So speaking, writing, reading, and listening.
Yep.
And then if you really think about swirl, that is how we all develop literacy. So when students are transforming from English language learning, they do get a score on all four of those areas. And sometimes one of those four areas will develop in full way before the others. So it's really acknowledging that we think of literacy as reading and writing,
Hmm.
and we forget that speaking and listening can be incredibly equal parts to that. And in fact, with the rapid advance of the science of reading, one of my favorite pieces in that research is that fluency matters at any grade level. And so if I'm a struggling reader in 10th grade,
Hmm.
you should focus on my fluency before you focus on anything else.
Hmm.
And I know just last week, I have this, I will not stop beating this drum, but sometimes instructors don't always agree with me. But I walked in a classroom and they were doing med term, and they were never doing, they were never speaking the terms other than the root and the suffix at the same, separate. And I kept saying, if you cannot fluently say endodontist you can't read it fluently and make meaning when you're reading it. And the fluency piece is huge. And sometimes I think we don't want to go back to those elementary days. And that's why, it's important to know the research. So I am one of the biggest advocates for productive talk. I continually point out areas where students could engage in productive talk because it is a part of literacy development. And I just think when you write to learn instead of learning to write,
Yeah, right.
and you productively talk using technical vocabulary, I feel like you really advance students on a whole new level.
Yeah, agreed. I love it. So how would you see that happening in a classroom, say a math classroom or a science or right where you're hitting all four of those components, but then also how do you relate them? What are some ideas around how you can relate those to a career readiness approach? Thoughts on
A
that?
tough question, Scott.
Yeah, I know.
The
Well, you knew I was going to give you a tough one.
I did. I expected something to come. So honestly, the employability skill that I would relate that to is what I call, Brene Brown would call it vulnerability. I
Mm-hmm.
think Wagner would call it flexible thinking. I
Mm-hmm.
would call it agility and just being able to think and not be afraid of failure. Or, in the IT world, they would call it being a lead learner. And being a lead learner means that you can learn alongside someone else without being intimidated. And
Mm-hmm.
so take it to the world of Daniel Pink. Daniel Pink
Right.
wishes every educator in America would motivate students by giving them a challenge that's interesting. And so I'll give you one that my daughter gave me. She said that she was challenged they were given 3 facts about New York City, and then the challenge was based on these 3 facts, how many parking spaces do you think exist in New York City?
Wow.
Nothing about that was about the outcome answer. It was all about how are you thinking through this problem?
Right.
And you don't have to carrot and stick a kid to work on that. It's
Right.
interesting. And then, and I mean, I would give a big shout out to my dear friend Victor Saad from Experience Institute. Those Stanford design thinking models, like if
Mhm.
you're not using those yet, Google that and download the free samples because that is some powerful things that work to flexibility of thinking.
Yeah, what I love about what you're saying is it's I've heard some things around what we call A to Z teaching versus Z to A learning, right?
Oh, I've
And
not heard that.
yeah, and it's basically exactly kind of what you talked about, right? Where Z to A is presenting a problem and saying, okay, in a group, right? It needs to be in a
Mhm.
group. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but it's better to be in a group and okay, now solution it, figure it out and apply or research or figure out what it is that you need to know, right? That's the
Mhm.
knowledge part of it. Like I need to
Yeah,
know this to be able to solve this problem. But we start with the problem, right? It's
right.
like UDL in a sense, but
Hmm.
it has a lot more to do with real world application. And
Yeah,
if you think about it, think about how much, even in our world of education, administrators to teachers, even this happens. It's that A to Z.
right. That
E,
does make sense.
right?
Hmm.
A to Z is we teach you, tell you, and then you go do, and then we'll evaluate how you do it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so and think of how conditioned we've been in relationship to that in our educational system,
Oh, right.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, our kids right now they want to know the information and then go apply it versus try to figure that problem out. But
yeah.
another thing
So true.
I really loved that you brought up in Sylvester's webcast was that talk a little bit about when kids are younger, they ask a ton of questions.
Yeah, this is my
Yeah,
favorite
right,
soapbox.
right, right. I love that. But it goes to the point of what we're just talking about. We condition our kids to A to Z as
Oh,
they go through our
it's so
system,
true.
right?
Oh, no, no.
Right?
I have a 3.5-year-old grandson now who just entered the Y, and I love it. And his aunt said to me the other day, "How long do you think we have to be in this stage?" And I said, "Are you kidding? I love this." But it's
Yeah.
true. I mean,
What? Yeah. Tell us a little
yeah.
bit about that
I
research
will,
that you know about.
yeah. So the soapbox that I'm on is that 3 and 4-year-olds on the average, experts tell us they ask 300 questions a day. And as they travel through, by the time they are juniors, experts tell us that in the course of a school day, if you're talking about straight academic questions, the average junior asks 2 questions a day. And when I go into classrooms, sometimes I will, instead of going in the classroom, I'll stand outside the classroom and just watch my phone and ratio the teacher to student talk time. And that was a big point of discussion in the Global Achievement Gap book. And I do it, and it's just really frustrating. But if you don't learn to chunk instruction and then give students some kind of environment to ask the questions in, it can be really painful. And so one of the things I think has to happen is you have to stop seeing yourself when, like a keynote that I deliver, the central message is how you define teacher is how you teach. And so stop seeing yourself as someone who delivers content, because again, Moore's law, they don't need the content. Knowledge is at our fingertips. We have way too much knowledge at our fingertips. And what we need is to get students more curious. And so I love the Right Question Institute. I love the question formation technique. There are so many strategies about getting students to actively engage in questions. But the number one thing that has to happen is you have to take grades and just stop. And I get so much flack every time I say de-emphasize grades, because people will say, well, parents will want them. Well, sure, but not forever, just in the beginning, but give them some other kind of feedback. So when you said the evaluative, earlier, you said, teach you, tell you, and then we evaluate you.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that goes along with that de-emphasizing grades is there are 4 kinds of feedback. But as educators that went through the system, our tendency is to do what we're familiar with, and we're familiar with corrective and evaluative feedback. Well, every psychologist will tell you, when you tell me I'm a 72%, you've lost me. Like any directional feedback you're going to give me stops. And so I like to showcase strategies where power of a really good teacher is to facilitate instead of deliver content, and to create an environment where you force me to ask questions. And that, to me, happens when you do things like a carousel or Socratic circle, or some of these I make up myself, but like I have one called Figure It Out, where I'm trying to make Daniel Pink proud of me. Here is a really interesting challenge. Now you figure it out. And it's really interesting, because it's an interesting transition to watch a teacher go from standard teaching of lecturing to I'm going to facilitate and force the students to ask me the questions. And I know a teacher told me a few years ago, the first time that he did that, he said, I kind of felt meaningless. And I think that was hard for me to stand and watch the students struggle. And then, they started asking me questions. So to empower him a little bit, we ended up taking, tickets, the little tear off tickets that you get like at a fair.
Yeah.
So we gave every team of students 3 tickets and said, in the course of this 40-minute research phase, you have to give your instructor these tickets. You have to ask 3 questions. You have to get rid of these 3 tickets. So make sure that you have 3 questions during this. And then sometimes we flip it and say, okay, you're asking way too many questions. You need to figure it out more. But just really turning it into, how do I get the students to just ask me questions?
Yeah, that's, it's so true. We, even as adults, and even as teachers to leadership groups, right? Where we don't do enough of figure it out,
No, we don't.
Some of the work that I do with our leadership teams to support our readiness teams, those that are implementing the work, is to just coach up, say less, and and actually even to make the comment, well, that's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
Because we want the solution right in front of us.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that Z to A concept. We're so conditioned to need to know the information up front. because we're tested on what the product is going to be or the answer, right? And
Yeah.
so shifting that is just super, super hard.
You
So
know, oh, I was going to say on another level to that, I was thinking while you were talking that in the But I'm Not a Reading Teacher book, there's a list of higher order questions, because that's the other problem, is that when we ask questions, if we ask the what, which is, when you're teaching and you're paying attention to like what 152 other variables in the classroom,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to always be thinking about those higher order stems. And so sometimes I have gone and I have the higher order question stems, like how would someone view this problem in 20 years? Or how is blank similar to blank? How is this different than this? Or what would be the perspective of someone who is 40? And having stations where you deliver 20 minutes of content and then send students to different areas where the question stems are and have them formulate questions based on those stems, because then you're teaching them how good thinkers think beyond what.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, agreed. You said the figure it out strategy before, and obviously I've heard you talk a little bit about that. Tell our guest a little bit about which is another thing I stole from him, to be very honest. Um, Grouping of students and having like roles, responsibilities versus like straight
Yeah.
road versus them being in a team, a collab team. Talk a little bit about like some suggestions on, how teachers could do that.
So I'll go to a couple of two different examples on that. So one of my friends that was an automotive teacher, he was a big holdout in trying my figure it out. And we had this conversation, and I know he knows I share this all the time, but he said, "You just don't understand, Sandy, the content's too difficult." And I said, "Well, believe it or not, in psychology, understanding different cognitive behavioral therapy sessions is a little difficult too, but students can figure it out." So I got him one day to trust me. And there are 4 ignition systems, and this is where I go into an area that I only know surface level.
Right.
So you guys have to give me grace on this. But so I have a firm rule that you never team more than 3 ever. And the reason is that diffusion of responsibility. And a lot of times I think we want to think if there's 4 people, that one person will just digress out of their own laziness. But what I have found in my 30 years of education, it equally is someone in the 4 assesses that they're the best and dismisses the one they see as the weakest student. That I've seen that with my own 2 eyes. So both things can happen. But the point is, a group of 3 where each person knows their role is the best way to keep everyone working. So he trusted me. We brought in a lot of coils and springs. We gave each team a different ignition system, put them in 3s. We gave them the ridiculous 20-pound automotive textbook. We gave them an iPad with some headphones. We gave them a huge piece of chart paper. If you don't know me or my ways yet, I'm a huge illustrator. I really believe in the power of non-linguistic representation, and that really works. And so we say one student is responsible for looking the process up on YouTube, finding some videos and listening to that to explain it to the team. Another one is looking in the book and the articles and telling the other person how to do the diagram. And then the 3 of you are going to create a flow. And then after 45 minutes, you're going to present your ignition system to the class. So going back to questioning, what happens then is the students don't know it well, but they're not expected to, because they go into this with the instructor saying, "I know this is difficult, figure it out as best you can." And then when they're presenting, he's firing all kinds of probing questions at them. So the learning is just so authentic and real. It is great. And
Yeah.
I have to tell you, after we did that twice, he said to me, "In your book somewhere, you have all those flow charts and diagrams. I need an 18 by 11 linear and cyclical, because that's what's going to help shape their thinking." And every year he does this, the essays at the end just get better and better quality and length. We've saved those over like the last 7 years. It's really fun to go see how bad they were before when he did lecture, and versus the figure it out. It's great. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Right. Obviously, the kids love that much more than listening to somebody
So much
tell
better.
them, right? Because just exactly what you're talking about, a lot of us are conditioned to tell us how we do this. How am I supposed to do this? But younger kids, obvious K-12 obviously want to experiment. They want to get in and try and really move to that problem solving opportunity.
Yeah.
So here's the $1 million question for you is, we see so much, right? We see so much of, here's the information, I'm going to provide it for you in all of our classrooms, right? Take your notes, however you do it. How do we shift? How do you shift to, right? How do you shift to the example you just described? How do we get that so it's happening in every single classroom?
So I will tell you that the one of the entire foundational premises of PLC and CTE
Mm,
is change that's not teacher driven is never going to be second order change.
right.
It has to be teacher driven. And so to me, whoever the leaders are in the building, like, the teacher leaders to your administrative team, one of the things you have to do is you have to get people to see it for themselves. And so,
Mhm.
like the auto teacher that I shared that with, had I not co-taught with him, I doubt if he would have done it.
Right.
But you need to break down those walls of I feel judged, because I do think a lot of teachers feel heavily judged in today's world,
Mhm.
and let teachers, experiment with students. But for him, once we did that and he saw the student work, he never went back. He still does it today. And,
Oh,
that's
wow.
been like 6 or 7 years that we've been doing that process. And it's because he saw it that it worked. And so to me, creating a safe environment where you can try those kind of things and see the result yourself, and then getting teachers to share with other teachers. Going back like 20 years ago, well, actually, it's gosh, I'm going to date myself, but I think it was even longer. It was when Marzano's work first came out on high schools at work, with those 9 strategies or 9
Yeah.
methods that really do have an increased effect size. So today I use Hattie's effect sizes to kind
Mhm.
of prove my points and then model that. But back in that day, we did something that was groundbreaking, and we allowed a team of teachers to go into other teachers and
Mm.
just watch them. And that was really important for my own professional journey and understanding better instruction, is that you have to trust. You have to trust that your colleagues want you to be better and they want themselves to be better. And so if you can create an environment where your staff understands, like, we're in this together, we're going to try to create best practices together. So people are going to watch me, I'm going to watch them, and really focus on 2 things. Like, we're going to be facilitators and
Mhm.
we want students to ask more questions. Those are the only 2 things you're looking for. And, the more that you can do that, the more that I think you'll get that genuine sharing of best practices. But
Yeah.
it has to be teacher driven or it will
Yeah.
never last.
Yeah, I totally agree. With the work that we're doing here at CESA 2 and some of the things we're doing that I'm doing with districts is you said it just perfectly. We, start with the why, that cognitive investment where the rationale, kind of
Mhm.
the point there. But typically the mistakes we see a lot of the times is that we get really excited about the what, right?
Mhm.
We adopt the new what. I mean, I look
Mhm.
at PLC as a part of this, and I'm really a firm believer in PLC. But we saw that we got really excited about it, and who makes the decision then on how it gets implemented.
Mhm.
And if it's not generated by those educators in the room doing the work, it's
It's so
not going to,
true.
right? It's
Mhm.
not going to be organic. It's just not. And how often do we set those agendas? How often do we, and when I say
Mhm.
we, I say it as an administrator, right? As
Right,
a
right,
leader.
right, right, right.
We, we,
Mhm.
we set the agendas. We set the agendas for professional development. It's just been
Mhm.
the history of what we do in education. So, but
Yeah,
I
it's
know,
so true.
yeah, you said it just perfectly though. Just how we need to move forward is let the doers be the ones that set
Yeah.
the pace of it, and then get together and talk about it. But all right, so I want to just got a couple minutes left here. I want to talk a little bit about you. I'd like you to talk a little bit about Catapult, if you would,
Oh,
and
sure.
give me. I'm really curious. I know Kevin fairly well, and I know Catapult. I'm not here to sell Catapult by any means, but I do want to support you. You know, what can we expect? What's happening? What are you going to bring to the table at Catapult?
So we are doing I am a part of the instructional excellence in CTE education that Kevin has put together. And it is a really great team. There are several because we're trying to cross secondary and post-secondary to include people who are working at the post-secondary level as well. But it crosses everything from what do you do with that achievement gap in the room? What do you do with English language learners that everyone will be experiencing an increase in over the next decade? To my work is how do you, create that system working towards internships and work-based learning? And there's a differentiation focus. So it is a great Catapult purchase. And so for people who aren't familiar with Kevin's work, I mean, it's easy to sell Kevin. He's great.
Yeah, he's
But
good.
the vision of Catapult is to get everyone watching and listening to the same message from some expert in the nation around a topic, and then being able to take your team and really decipher that, and what do you agree with and what do you not agree with. And one of the things I always say is we say things like be hard on ideas and soft on people, which is the way you should, but
Right.
sometimes when the message is delivered internally, to be hard on the idea feels like you're being hard on the person. And so I love that it's this person on a screen, and then you get to talk to them in live Q&A, but this person on the screen for your team, you can openly disagree with anything that person says, and feelings are off the table.
Mhm.
So it just makes for a great discussion. My team has had 2 different catapults, and it's been so beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It is pretty exciting, and it makes a lot of sense. So when is your program as a part of Catapult going to be, coming out? It must be
It's
down the road.
out right
Oh, it is.
now.
It
Yeah.
is.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to take a peek. I'm gonna have
Yeah,
to
it's
take a peek.
good.
Yeah. Maybe you can get me in the back door so I don't have to pay for it. That's something we could work
Kevin
a
likes
deal
me
out
that
with.
much.
So I do, obviously you're a part of our webcast series, right? So
Huh?
did you take a peek at the list of who
Oh, I
we
did.
got?
Yeah, I saw Kevin on there,
Yeah.
and Sylvester Chisholm. And I was so excited when Sylvester asked me to be on his podcast because I'd already been listening to the Global CTE, and he is a good person with the questioning too.
Yeah. Yeah.
That like you understand how to do that questioning to get people to bring more out, and how do you make that into like a classroom strategy?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm a rookie at this. I'll be quite honest, but we'll get there. It's more about the content that, like people like yourself bring to the table. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do with this, right? It's not about a webcast. It's about the information. It's about networking. It's about sending it out to, numerous people.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So, just to put a plug in also, we are going to do what we're going to call, the future is clear, teach like it's 2045, an unconference we're going to have in April. Yeah.
Fun.
I know you and I haven't really talked about it that much. Maybe you want to come on out and join. We're gonna, what we're really looking at doing with it is to have that not your typical conference, right? Where you go into different rooms and you listen to people talk for a half hour, 45 minutes. We're gonna really make it high level engagement, maybe intimate a little bit. Some really good panel discussion, some really good conversation by those key speakers, and we got some good ones, I think, coming in. We've got the CAPS network is going to come in. I'm not sure exactly who's going to come from there, but we also got District C coming to town. They're working with a school district
Exciting.
in our state, MPS, our biggest school district. So yeah, we've got some really cool people on the docket. We're working on a few more, but we'd love to maybe have you come. We can
Yeah,
talk
that's
about that.
exciting.
Yeah,
The
we can
next
talk
book I'm
about it.
working on is around 2040. That is so
Yeah,
funny. We
yeah,
didn't talk about that, and that's really coincidental.
yeah.
That's funny.
Well,
We're on the same page.
yeah, it leads into my final question for you, and that is, right, because our tag has teach like it's 2045. What do you see? What do you feel education is going to look like in 2045, or at least down the road? What do we need to be?
You know, one of the things I hope ends and is replaced with a better strategy is at the essence of education, grouping students by the year they were born. I um
Mm,
I think that that could be the most outdated practice in all
wow.
of education. And I think, just all being born in 2017 might not be the criteria for grouping us in the same grade level. And I have a daughter who lives in Europe and is married to a Luxembourg resident. And
Wow.
I have been following the methods that they use. And it's very similar to the Swiss model that's becoming very popular in the US. And it is really about honing in on skill sets and not I'm not necessarily a fan of talking to elementary students about their careers. I think it should
Mhm.
be, what do you enjoy doing? What
Right.
are you good at? And focusing on skill development. And I
Mhm.
will just say, one of my favorite people that I've never met is John Maxwell. And I could not agree with him more in his message of figure out what you want to do and become a 9 or a 10. Don't spend your time on areas that you're only going to be a 3 or a 4, because the world doesn't need more 3s.
Oh,
The world
wow.
needs 9s and 10s.
Right.
And so I just think if we could do education better, where we're grouping kids around skills and genuinely having those conversations about, when did you feel flow? And when did you feel
Mhm.
like you were in the right
Wow.
element? And, those are the things, like right now, in all of K through 10, where do we ever celebrate someone having a mechanical aptitude?
Wow. Yeah.
There is no elementary or middle school course, in my knowledge, that really says, wow, look at your mechanical ability. Let's hone in on this. And so if I could change anything, it would be that.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Super cool. All right. So I really appreciate you joining us
It's
today.
been fun.
Tell us how people can get in touch with you. I'm sure you're okay with that. If they'd like
Yeah.
to reach out, learn more about your books, or even just a chat. So how can they get in
I'm
touch
on
with
LinkedIn, just Sandra Adams, and on the ACTE, I'm the admin division VP right now, so you can contact me via there. And then also just sandraadams.cte@gmail is a real convenient way to find me.
you? Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Well,
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for joining us. It means a
Thanks
lot.
for all your work to help get everybody's message out there, Scott. It's great.
Yeah, appreciate that. So
Thank you.
thank you everybody for joining us. As we depart, remember, the future is clear. Take care.